Brad Carpenter playing Selesnya tokens. Over on the right-hand side, we see Ross Merriam and Teamer Reclamation.
So Brad Carpenter's deck, fairly normal, including the 2 Huatley Radiant Champions in the main deck, which is a build that was basically championed by Sam Black at the last Mythic Championship.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Nice use of the word Mythic Championship, by the way.
Do my best.
Here you see Carpenter going to go ahead and start off with the Legion's Landing. Ross has the ideal 2-drop in the form of Growth Spiral. Going to go ahead and deploy a tap Stomping Ground. Pass the turn back to Brad Carpenter. Going to get in for 1, gain a life. 2119 are our life totals presently.
Ross Merriam 3 for 3 on turn 2 Growth Spirals that put in a land.
Tough life.
I'm just saying.
That's nice. That's what you're looking for out of this Teamer Reclamation decks. How many lands Ross packing today?
25 is what these decks normally play. And just Growth Spiral is strong. I would imagine
Look at this start from Ross.
Would imagine that if you play Growth Spiral on turn 2, it's going to do what the card says it does, you know. But it just feels so good and so bad when you actually brick on it. You don't have a land to put in the battlefield, or you don't have a 4th land. But Ross, having Growth Spiral into Wilderness Reclamation, that's the nut draw right there.
Absolutely. Best possible draw from Ross. Brad, though, not doing too bad on his side either. We see Amara. What is it? Soul of the Accord? Is that the particular title on that card?
That's the one.
Okay. Not bad. Not bad from my memory.
You see that Jerry Thompson token getting in there.
Looking good. And Jerry Thompson going to go ahead and fuel off a Conclave Tribunal. But Ross ready with the Sinister Sabotage to answer. Not going to take that Wilderness Reclamation off the battlefield today.
Yeah, pretty good answer for Ross. I'm sure in most of these scenarios, you just kind of want to goldfish each other. Like Ross would prefer to fire off a Chemister's Insight on that turn, but you need to protect the Wilderness Reclamation. And he's getting pretty good use out of a clunky 3-mana counterspell in a matchup where the counterspells aren't that great.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, things have gone well for Ross thus far, but, you know, like I mentioned, Brad advancing his board, doing just fine. Battlefield presence already established. Amara is kind of like a battlefield in a can, right? It just does that for you.
Yep, for sure. I mean, all it takes is 1 Fiery Cannonade for Ross to clean this up.
Look what we have here. 1 Fiery Cannonade, just as the doctor ordered. Going to go ahead, get rid of that entire battlefield. Ross is going to pass the turn back with lands at the ready. No 5th land there from Ross. Interesting. Also means there's a handful of gas, so not the worst spot to be in. And speaking of gas, Sinister Sabotage beating up the History of Benalia. Going to go ahead and put Niv Mizzet into the graveyard. Ross, I believe, looking for mana as it stands right now.
Yeah, so Ross, having access to 4 mana already and surveilling away a Niv Mizzet has got to be kind of scary from the green-white side, especially with Ross at 16 and the Selesnya player just having nothing on the battlefield.
Here we have a second copy of Wilderness Reclamation. That's going to go ahead and fuel an Explosion for 4 new cards in Ross's hand. Unfortunately, in the end step, so can't deploy any lands found. But I have a feeling Ross is going to untap for his next turn. Very happy, pretty safe as well. Let's see if Brad can get some battlefield presence generated here.
Do you remember Sphinx's Revelation?
I am familiar with the card, yes.
I feel like you would have liked that card a little bit.
I did, quite a bit. You know, I mostly played mono black during that period of Standard, but I've cast my share of Sphinx's Revelation as well.
What about before that?
Prior to mono black being the dominant deck.
Well, I got to play Jeskai Flash.
Okay, yeah, I played a bit of that deck as well.
Okay. And the first Revelation was medium-sized, drew you a bunch of cards, but basically all it did was help you get to the second Revelation.
Yeah, we see that similar play pattern these days with Hydroid Krasis, right?
Yep, absolutely.
First Krasis leads to the second Krasis, and then the game gets out of control very quickly. Speaking of getting out of control, we're also going to go ahead and deploy Search for Azcanta. That's ready to flip next turn. Ross just maximizing mana here. Going to go ahead and fire off Chemister's Insight. Take a look at 2 new cards. That's going to hit the bin. Ross going to tap 3, get that next untap trigger. Access to 8 mana. Just going to spend 4 of it. Chemister's Insight. Jump started. 2 more cards off the top of the deck. There's another explosion. There's another explosion. Ross going to look to end this game in short order pretty quickly.
Yeah, and you see the body language shift from him, too, where he's in turbo mode. He knows that he's winning.
Yes.
He's very far ahead. He's just trying to get this game over as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. Ultra meticulous during the early turns, making sure to never misstep in even the slightest way once we get to the later stages of the game and Ross knows he has it in hand, ready to accelerate the pace. Here you see Hawatli, Radiant Champion. Haven't seen too much of that card in Standard.
No, not really. Like I said, this was a card that Sam Black popularized in this build of the deck, and it has caught on to some degree. You see some Magic Online lists with people playing Hawatli as well, and I'm not convinced that it belongs, but a lot of other people are, and they have the experience. I'm going to go ahead and trust them, and Hawatli is just a card that always seemed just a little too short of constructed playability.
So Ross going to take a moment to read that card. We'll read it as well. +1, put a loyalty counter on Hawatli. For each creature you control, -1, target creature gets +X, where X is the number of creatures you control. -8, you get an emblem with whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. Hawatli, by its nature, feels kind of win more in a lot of spots because you have to already have a battlefield presence to maximize Hawatli. That's just what it does. But it does so really, really hard, and it can snowball games very quickly and close the door in spots where it's very good.
Well, I think Hawatli's inclusion probably leads you to believe that even if you have a battlefield presence, that isn't enough to close out games in some of these matchups. So, yeah, it might seem like win more, but it could be the thing that it's like the payoff card for generating a battlefield presence. It's like a Venerated Loxodon or Unbreakable Formation,
Sure.
March to the Multitude, stuff like that. It's just another one of those cards.
Here is the third copy of Wilderness Reclamation, and I'm an English major. I'm not going to do math here, but I think Ross may just be able to kill Brad here. He is going to go ahead and show the explosion. And that is going to be enough for Brad, going to pick up the cards. And we're going to head over to game 2 of this matchup. That seems like it was the first of our games to finish. So the team of Grace, Davis, and Merriam up just one game right now.
You were talking about wanting to do Nexus of Fate stuff. Explosion's looking pretty good.
An explosion looked great there. I think either would have gotten the job done in the situation where you have 3 Wilderness Reclamations as well as a flip Search for Escanta. But that's splitting hairs. Ultimately, Ross able to run away with the game once he was able to get all of his engine online. Why don't we take a look at the sideboards here? We can start over on Brad's side. There you see 4 Cruel Harpooners, 3 Baffling End, 3 Knight of Autumn, 2 Ajani, 2 Vivian, and finally 1 Crushing Canopy. Jerry, what are you liking here from Brad?
Disenchants. Blow up those Reclamations, blow up those Search for Escantas. Knight of Autumn, even Crushing Canopy are more than fine. Vivian Reed is a nice card that is a threat in that it gets you a bunch of your own threats, but also comes down and gets rid of a Niv Mizzet. Although you did see Ross kind of aggressively discarding his Niv Mizzets that game to fuel Chemist's Insight, so maybe he's not leaning on those super hard. And then if you're expecting this sort of deck to bring in like mana creatures, you could go towards Baffling End or something like that, but that's more of like a Simic thing, not a Teamer thing.
I think that's a good assessment. Let's head over and look at Ross's sideboard. There you see 1 copy of Entrancing Melody, 1 Fiery Cannonade, 1 Gift of Paradise, 1 Biogenic Ooze, 2 Star of Extinction, 2 Negate, 3 Rekindling Phoenix, 3 Crushing Canopies, and 1 more copy of Niv Mizzet. Jerry, how do you feel on Ross's side?
I like Rekindling Phoenix against blue decks, any sort of Drakes or mono blue aggro. I don't necessarily like it in these sort of matchups because they can go around you pretty easily. And I wouldn't like Star of Extinction against like the mono white aggro or Azorius aggro decks, but I think Selesnya is just a tad on the slower side, and they have Planeswalkers, which makes them kind of similar to Golgari mid-range, where I could see Star of Extinction doing a lot of good work here. And then the additional Fiery Cannonade, I think, is a no-brainer. Entrancing Melody is decent. Always nice to snag a Night Token from History of Benalia just for 2 mana. And then, Biogenic Ooze, Gift of Paradise, maybe Niv Mizzet to round things out. Maybe you want some negates for their sideboard Planeswalkers and Conclave Tribunals and stuff like that. But I could take it or leave it.
It'll be interesting to see how much Ross chooses to pivot here, because you're not faced with the counter magic you usually see a lot of these decks have access to in post-board games. This isn't Azorius aggro where they now are able to present negate. So Ross kind of free to do what he wants on the stack. We'll see how much he leans into that approach.
Yeah, at that point, it's just finding the best defensive tools and also the best way to win the game. And sometimes cards like Biogenic Ooze, they play both roles.
Right.
And quite the combo with Wilderness Reclamation, too.
Absolutely.
Maybe not as powerful or splashy as Expansion Explosion, but
still feels good.
Still gets out of control.
Absolutely. So we're in round 8 right now. One more round to go today. Emma and Matthias going to be back in the booth for round 9. But if they finish up and you find yourself jonesing for more Magic, you just haven't had enough, head over to our YouTube page. You can find us over at youtube.com/StarCityGames. You'll see highlights from Versus Live, Commander Versus. There's flashback games. The best of the SCG Tour is there, and of course we have our archives after all these events. They get put up on YouTube. You can check out past matchups. Great place to study, great place to learn, and great place to just be entertained and watch some Magic.
It's not bad. I've made a lot of that content myself, so.
Yep. If you just haven't had enough Brian and Jerry in your life, you can go find other matches we commentated. You know, have us sit down with you for dinner, play us at the dinner table. It's like we're part of the conversation.
That's kind of weird.
It's a little weird. I like it, though. Or you could just invite us to dinner, too. I mean, you know, we're hungry. We'll sit down with you.
That's nice.
Yeah.
I'd appreciate it. You know, we might not attend, but it's always nice to be invited.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I agree.
It feels good.
I agree. Just to know you're wanted is worth a lot. Players shuffling up here for game 2. We do have a result from one of the other matches. There you see Jim Davis up a game against War Prison. What do you know about the Mono Green Tron versus War Prison matchup, Jerry?
I mean, I know that Tron was basically a nightmare for Lantern control, right? And I can't imagine it gets much better for War Prison, although they're always set up with like more Ghost Quarters and like main deck Crucible and stuff like that. So I'm pretty sure that they try a little harder to actually beat the Tron matchup. But I'm also not a War Prison expert. I would still just imagine it's tough. Oh, and in Zan's version is the Thopter Sword one, which is basically a bunch of additional things that don't do very much in this matchup.
That's my read on it as well. I was wondering if there was like some access to significant counter magic. There really isn't much in Zan's list, so I have a feeling this is going to be a very Tron-favored matchup over on the side of Jim Davis.
Yeah, 2 Pithing Needle, no ways to actually kill a land, it looks like, because there's no real necessity to play Crucible in this list because you're not trying to kill people with Ipnu Rivulet. You actually have a win condition with Thopter Foundry and Sword of the Meek.
Right.
So yeah, no land disruption. You have the main deck Damping Sphere, obviously, but that's only a way to slow them down, to not actually stop them from what they're doing. So it is very much leaning on Pithing Needle.
I have to tell you, Jerry, it makes me so happy to see Jester's Cap in these lists. I don't even care if it's good. If you started playing Magic at the same time I did, right around the release of Ice Age, Jester's Cap was the hottest card on the planet. Everyone wanted a Jester's Cap, and they were impossible to find. So I have such huge attachment to the card that it doesn't even matter if it's good. I'm just happy to see Jester's Cap back in the mix. I would certainly be firing off a OG Ice Age Jester's Cap in my War Prison list.
Do you remember Grinning Totem?
Yeah, absolutely, from Mirage. Another huge chase card.
Which was just awful.
Horrible. Absolutely unplayable. That was back when Inquest kind of set the meta, and they would tell you what the top card in the set was. And they declared Necropotence unplayable, by the way, the worst card in Ice Age. So that tells you kind of where their card assessment is at.
They're just like, this has too much text.
Yeah, I'm not going to bother reading that.
But
there you see on the screen Grinning Totem. Go ahead and take a read of that one. It does basically nothing. Don't worry about it.
Grinning Totem was the very first card I opened in a booster pack.
So you were paid at that point. That was like a $30 card.
So the thing is I didn't know how to play. My mother just bought me a pack of cards because she was like, oh, you're a nerd. You might like this. And
Nailed it.
She was right. It just took 4 years before I could find someone who would teach me how to play.
Okay.
And then I looked up the card in Inquest, and I was like, $20.
Get paid.
What?
Get paid.
I think my friend ripped me off for that card anyway. So
it's often how things went back then. So here you see the players, Brad Carpenter, coming out of the gates with an Amara. Going to follow that up with Legion's Landing. Nice little follow-up. You already have 3 creatures on the battlefield.
It me.
Let's see.
4 for 4. Ross Merriam on Growth Spirals. Does he have the land? Obviously he does.
Always has it. Ross is so good at this game. Let's see if we have the turn 4 Wilderness Reclamation as well just one more time. What do you got, Ross? Show it to me. Show me the Wilderness Reclamation. Just Fiery Cannonade, that's all.
I see that Cannonade, and I mean, it's no Reclamation in the Cannonade.
Right.
Right? But I think it might be good enough.
Seems pretty good there. Brad Carpenter, follow-up Tithe Taker. What else do we have? That looks like a Saproling Migration. Going to go ahead and put a few fungi on the board.
A couple Saprolings, not quite Jerry T tokens, but what are you going to do?
Saproling's one of my favorite tokens. Again, I speak about the era in which I started playing Thallid. Thallid is one of my hallmark cards from back in the day.
See, I like Thallids, but that's because of Time Spiral, which I guess is indicative of the good job that Time Spiral did.
Calling back to that.
Yeah, calling back to all the previous planes and creatures and stuff like that.
I love Time Spiral. A little bit of a maligned set, and I can understand why, but certainly one of my favorites.
Oh, I can't imagine if that was my first Magic set. I would just be like, this game is
blown
awful.
Out. Yeah. Yeah, but you would not be crazy for thinking that. Certainly not the most beginner-friendly set. Ross firing off the Searcher Escanta, looking to get that powerful engine online. Brett did a nice little job of rebuilding on his turn, put 3 creatures into play, able to trigger that Legion's Landing right away, and is going to swing in for 4 damage. Not a bad rebuild.
That's great. You saw a little bit of hesitation from Ross Merriam there to tap out and play that Search for Escanta, and this might be why. Legion's Landing becomes a land that taps for mana, enables Vivian Reed.
Huge punishment of Ross's tap out there from Brad Carpenter. Basically the best possible play you could have in that spot.
The swings are real in this game.
Oh, yeah.
Very back and forth.
Going to go ahead and pass the turn back to Ross. Now with a decent-looking battlefield. And seeing this board presence that Brad has generated, it really impresses upon me how right you were about Star of Extinction. I think it is a fine card to have in this matchup.
It's just the ultimate catch-up tool.
Yeah.
And Golgari / Sultai are basically the only deck that are presenting like these mid-range green creatures plus some planeswalkers, and that matchup is tough for Team of Reclamation, absolutely. So I understand them wanting Star of Extinction, but Selesnya just happens to be doing kind of the same thing. It's probably the best card in the matchup, honestly.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think Ross did have Negate in hand on that last turn, chose to deploy the Search for Escanta. Maybe a little bit of a vulnerable spot on the mana curve for Ross. I have to see how this game evolves from that point, if that's a crucial mistake or not.
Well, I think what happened was he realized that the Tithe Taker's on the battlefield, so it wouldn't have mattered after he played the Growth Spiral.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Already committed at that point. Now, could he have played the land? Because he played the land tapped. He could have played it untapped, of course. And then you're clearly representing the game.
Right. So you play it untapped, and then you just pass the turn. That's a little awkward.
Right.
It's possible that maybe he wasn't supposed to Growth Spiral main, but because of the Tithe Taker, again, you kind of have to.
Tithe Taker, a complicated card to play around in a lot of spots. That's for sure.
It does a lot of tiny things.
Way more than you anticipate. Here you see a Knight of Autumn for Brad. That's going to do a fine job of cleaning up any future Wilderness Reclamations or Searcher Escantas that may enter the battlefield. And we're going to do the beatdown thing again. 3 damage headed Ross's way. Yeah,
Knight of Autumn is great because generally they need to play Wilderness Reclamation and then get an extra turn with it because they need to be able to float mana untap with Reclamation and then fuel a bunch of Chemistry Insights or Expansion Explosion. So having the Disenchant backup is nice.
Here you see kicked Saproling Migration from Brad Carpenter. Going to go ahead and put 4 Saprolings on the battlefield this time.
Not something you see every day.
No, not necessarily.
Outside of Dominaria Limited, at least.
Right. Let's see how Ross is going to navigate this. I think this game turned pretty quickly against Ross, despite having that Growth Spiral yet one more time.
Yeah, and this is the point where Selesnya Tokens is really threatening.
Right.
Brad has a commanding board presence. Any payoff is just going to be huge. And the Huatleys take the place of the Unbreakable formations, but against this sort of deck where Ross doesn't have any blockers, Huatley is just as good.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. 4 March of the Multitudes in the main deck for Brad. We don't know how many are there right now, but talking about a card that snowballs.
Yeah, it definitely does, but not very good against the Reclamation deck. Like, the first one is fine, but you're generally not trying to build that big of a battlefield presence.
Right.
And the Teamer Reclamation deck has sweepers, so March gets significantly worse.
So here you see Wilderness Reclamation. Ross going to float a little bit of mana here and go ahead and fire off another Fiery Cannonade.
Do we call that a 7-for-1?
That doesn't feel quite fair. I don't think the impact was that dramatic. Still a recurring problem on the battlefield for Ross in the form of that Vivian going to keep adding more and more to the battlefield, or maybe deal with that Wilderness Reclamation. Let's see. I would assume Knight of Autumn is going to step in for that task.
One of the things that I keep forgetting is a payoff for Selesnya is Flower Flourish.
Oh, yeah.
Because in my mind, it's just get a land, But Brad actually picked up a copy that turn, which, had it resolved, would have been absolutely lethal.
Yeah. Yeah, the Flourish side doesn't get as much press. Turns out your 6-mana spell doesn't get cast as often as your 1-mana spell, but certainly can end games in a hurry. Let's see if Brad's going to go ahead and take a backup copy of Knight of Autumn here. Looks like it. Going to add that to the hand.
So Ross knew the Night of Autumn was lurking. So kind of interesting for him to just run out the Wilderness Reclamation there. I see a lot of players wait until they have the ability to protect it, or they're going to get they'll wait till they have 8 mana so they get an extra 4 mana from it to fuel bigger explosions or whatever. What do you think about just running it out there? Is that normal?
Depends. It depends on the texture of Ross's hand, right? Like, what can he do in this spot? C is going to go ahead and fire off a Chemist's Insight, draw a couple cards. I can get wanting to force action from Brad, like make him answer your threat, and then you're kind of dictating the pace of the game a little bit more, but I don't know, that Vivien is still sitting on the battlefield, accruing advantage on every turn that passes.
Yeah, it's just an interesting spot. I see some players play where they just always jam it, and then I see some, like Kane Reinhardt, I know, is a person who just holds on to the Wilderness Reclamation for dear life until there's for sure a turn where he can actually abuse it to the utmost. And granted, that turn it did give Ross 2 extra mana, I think.
Right.
So still not bad.
Speaking of not bad, how do you feel about Niv Mizzet?
I mean, it's good, not when facing down a Vivien on 4, but Ross is going to be able to get a little bit of extra value thanks to a Shivan Fire in his hand, so it seems worth it.
I'll also clean up the Vivien as well.
Right.
And I think that's Ross's goal with this play. But Brad Carpenter might have other ideas. It's going to be Conclave Tribunal targeting that Niv Mizzet. That's not going to draw a card. Feeling we're about to see Shivan Fire.
These cards were released in the same set. It's almost like on purpose that Niv Mizzet was not keying off opponents' spells or non-creature spells.
Yeah, that makes a little bit of sense. I do like that there's enough non-instant and sorcery answers to Niv Mizzet. I've picked it off enough times where it's not completely disheartening.
Yeah, certainly things like Vivien or a Crawl Harpooner that you can play proactively are nice.
Right.
Just sitting there with a Conclave Tribunal rotting until they're able to play Niv Mizzet with like Counterspell backup or just be able to play a bunch of spells in the same turn. It feels bad, you know?
Yeah.
But the fact that Ross is forced to play Niv Mizzet into a Vivien that could actually just kill it, I mean, it just makes Vivien look so good.
Vivien underappreciated at set's release, I think.
Oh, yeah. But I think a lot of things had to happen, too, for Vivien to get into a place where it's main deckable.
I also think a lot of it comes down to like old suppositions about Planeswalkers. Like, Planeswalkers are not the same cards they used to be in the era of Gideon and, you know, Chandra, Torch of Defiance. These Planeswalkers have changed as time has gone on. And Vivien was one of the first to kind of reflect those new sensibilities, have a less, I guess I would say less overt impact on the battlefield. It's kind of something that just generates a smaller advantage over a large course of turns, but it's harder to deal with, and it has some more proactive answers tied into it. And I like this new approach to Planeswalkers a lot. It's led to a lot better feeling games.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I just feel like the main thing that people didn't like about Vivien was that she doesn't protect herself, really.
Right.
But she does when a lot of the threats in the format are flyers.
Exactly right. Ross going to go ahead and fire off a huge explosion here with the help of that Wilderness Reclamation. Going to re-up a completely new grip.
Only for 8.
Going to have to discard the hand size. Not bad. Not bad at all.
That was the turn I was talking about. You get to play this Reclamation knowing full well that it's probably going to get blown up, but it generated 4 mana this turn.
Yeah, as the game goes on, you have access to more of those type of turns.
Brian, it's like you saw this coming. It's like you understood that Wilderness Reclamation was going to be a powerful card.
It was my #1 card in the set, but I honestly feel if you slept on this card, you're kind of crazy. I just think it's absolutely bonkers. Like, it's free on its face.
Right.
How could it not be good?
Because you're spending a card to gain mana, which, granted, historically has been more or less busted.
Yeah. Yes, it has.
But really, I have to spend a card on this?
I promise you it's worth it.
What happens if I draw multiples, Brian? Isn't that bad?
No, play them all. You've won the game. Congratulations. Yeah, I mean, I think people went a little overboard. There's people who were talking about things like emergency bannings, and as people are apt to do, they get very excited when these new powerful cards show up. But I think it's a interesting addition to the format. I think the format is better for having it. It's a unique wrinkle. Look, if there's a problem, it's Nexus of Fate. I don't think it's actually the Wilderness Reclamation itself. I think it leads to interesting games.
This game is interesting adjacent.
That's a beautiful way of describing what we're seeing right now. Ross going to go ahead and fire off a Chemister's Insight. Has all the cards in the world, all the mana in the world. Brad just needed to close out the game. That's the problem. Brad had so many turns where he was generating value and putting more and more creatures onto the battlefield, and Vivian was doing its thing, and it all felt very good. But at some point, Ross's deck just does incredibly, incredibly powerful things, and it's at that point now.
Yeah, you can't give them enough time because this deck goes over the top of basically everyone.
I think that's right. We had an interesting result over in our modern matchup. You see that's all tied up. One game apiece between Jim Davis and Zan Syed. I don't even know how Zan could possibly win, quite frankly.
4 copies of Unwarned Ego, 3 Tezzeret Agent of Bolus. He's got some sideboard cards.
Okay, there's something there.
But the main deck, you draw these opening hands with like Thopters and welding jars, just a bunch of ham sandwiches, a bunch of things that don't really accomplish much. So.
Sure. Well, here's another Jerry Thompson entering the battlefield along with Amara. But Ross is just like, hey, I have all the mana in the world. You want to just go ahead and pick up your cards? And Brad says, yeah, you have about 4,000 mana. That'll do. Thank you very much. And that is going to do it. Ross Merriam taking down Brad Carpenter 2-0. A powerful display there from the Reclamation deck.
I liked it better when my token would show up and the game would immediately end when I had the Merit Lage token.
This token much smaller.
Yeah, I think it's still good. I'm glad that it sees camera time and gets played, you know?
No, I know you. You're a glory hog. You're always wanting to be on the battlefield, so there you are.
I'm just trying to stay relevant, man, one way or another.
Hey,
if it's
right
being on the battlefield, if it's doing commentary, you know?
Yeah, good idea. Always be building that brand. That's what Jerry Thompson's all about. As
Do
we
my
all know.
best.
So we are going to go ahead and shift over to this modern matchup. I want to see how things are going over there. Unmoored Ego does allow you to name lands. Am I correct?
Mysteries. Let's pull it up.
Yeah, why don't we take a look at Unmoored Ego? That could be a key wrinkle that we're seeing in this matchup. If you were just able to completely stop Jim Davis from ever getting his mana engine online. Okay.
I believe it does. Like, no, I think you can't name a basic land, right?
Right.
But I don't know enough for certain to actually say.
We'll be sure to pull it up once we get into the match. And look, that's apt to be much more meaningful on the play than on the draw. And that certainly is a path to which I could see Zan Syed stealing a game from Jim Davis.
You say that, but his deck does have 4 copies of Mox Opal, and if he is able to have that active by turn 2, being on the draw still doesn't really matter that
very
much.
Good point. That makes sense.
Can also do fancy things like Pithing Needle, their expedition map that they play, and it's also possible that Jim could stumble.
Yeah, Tron known to do that. It's a deck that has to mulligan aggressively. It's happy to do so. It's totally fine playing with 3-card hands, 4-card hands. It pulls out wins from those positions somehow where other decks would just fold. But you don't want to be doing that. Like, you would prefer to have your 7. It's nice to just have natural Tron and play Karn.
Well, Tron against War Prison is one of those matchups where raw card advantage doesn't necessarily matter. The War Prison deck is going to try and lock you out one way or the other. As the Tron player, you do just have to, first and foremost, assemble Tron, and then the second part of it is find a relevant way to kill them or disrupt the prison deck. And I think Karn is among the best, and maybe Ulamog is second best, just because it costs a little bit more, it's a little clunky. You know, and then there are things like Walking Ballista that can just outright kill your opponent. But as far as being clock plus disruption, I think that's where you want to be.
Yeah, that makes sense. Jim has fewer cards than he should. I don't know exactly how many fewer. I want to say that's 5, but and we do have confirmation that that is 5 cards in Jim Davis's hand. Meanwhile, Zan, 6 cards in hand. So, you know, that's a good point as far as the modern format goes. You should be mulliganing aggressively in modern. One of the mistakes I see newer players to the format make is they're very hesitant to mulligan You just need to be looking for your key cards quite often.
Which makes sense if you're coming from standard
Oh,
or limited,
absolutely.
any sort of lower powered format where the more cards you have, the better, right? Like your resources actually do matter. Modern is this weird format where only specific cards matter. You need to assemble your combo, assemble your mana base, do very specific things.
Well put. And here we do take a look at Unmoored Ego. It can, in fact, name a land. So that's one way of breaking up the Tron engine. We don't even know if Zan's leaning on that, but I think it's an interesting point that there is a way to disrupt mana here, even though we don't see Ghost Quarter.
You can name basic land because it only gets 4 of them.
You're right.
Interesting.
Yeah, very good point.
So Unmoored Ego, not very good against Relentless Rats and the like.
That's a shame, because that is a deck that is just the scourge of basically every format now.
Well, Persistent Petitioners is like the arena singleton boogie monster, I guess.
What is it? Thrumming Stone? Is that the Cold Snap card that
Oh,
often gets
yeah.
combined with those cards? Gives all your spells ripple. That's just good old-fashioned clean magic right there. So here you see Jim going to be able to put together Tron pretty quickly.
Not the ideal turn 3,
Not ideal.
but turn 4, not too bad, especially you're on 5, they're on 6. Maybe there's a slower game that's actually going to be happening here. So.
Interesting Jim choosing not to crack that star, but that makes sense with a lot of hands for sure.
You don't need it yet.
Well, you can search for your turn 3 Tron, right? But that assumes you have a payoff for your turn 3 Tron. So like I said, a lot of hands aren't going to crack the star in this spot. Not outlandish at all.
And here it is, the most powerful of turn 2 modern plays, Sword of the Meek.
What you going to do about that, Jim Davis? Jim's like, I'm going to activate Expedition Map, put my third Tron piece into play, and just have 7 mana for the rest of the game.
So Jim Davis, even on a mull to 5, was 1 card away from playing a turn 3 Karn Liberated. And granted, it had to be a very specific card, right? It had to be the power plant.
Well, he could have just had the Expedition Map a turn earlier, too.
Yeah, even that would have done it. Yep. Or the Sylvan Scrying that he drew this last turn, because he could have cracked the Chromatic Star to play it.
Correct. So he had 2 draws that were 1 turn off that would have just been natural turn 3 Tron. And not natural, but turn 3 Tron.
And even still, that just means he's assembling Tron and doing his thing just a turn later than what would be ideal.
Yeah, and Jim can also go get an additional land with Scrying this turn if he chooses to.
And it's not like Zan's deck really comes out of the gates. You see his turn 2 play, it doesn't do anything.
Yeah, it's just the Sword of the Meek. Not a whole lot going on there. Jim did go ahead and crack the star now, found a tower on top of the deck. Are we going to see access to 10 mana on the next turn? Looks like it. We're going to go get a land with that Sylvan Scrying. It's going to be the power plant. And now Tron is active. Access to 7 mana, 10 mana on the next turn. Is there a payoff in Jim's hand? That's the question.
So I think what happened there was Jim decided that he looked like he was going to crack the Expedition Map and just get a Tron land and pass, right? But he decided that it would be maybe higher upside if he just hit the Tron land naturally this turn. So he's like, all right, I'm going to crack the star, and now I'm going to Sylvan Scrying, keep the map in play.
Right.
And since he had burned the star, you have to use the Scrying instead of the map, even though it might be worse to have the map in play because of things like Pithing Needle.
It could be. It could be. There's upside to the play and downside to the play.
Yeah, for sure.
So the combo's online here. Not a combo we've seen a lot in Modern since it's been unbanned. Because remember, this was riding the ban list for a very long time. But that's the Thopter Sword combo, a combo you helped popularize, at least in the extended context, back when we were playing Dark Depths Thopter Sword, one of the most powerful decks of all time.
I did, and that deck was probably one of the reasons why when Modern as a format was created, that Sword of the Meek just remained on the ban list. And it got unbanned. I immediately top-8 an Invitational playing Thopter Sword. And the deck was good. It was good. But Modern is just in a place now where this sort of thing just doesn't really matter.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if it matters here. I think it likely won't because we're about to see Karn, and that's going to be with Sanctum of Ugin in play. So there's going to be an Ulamog following up that Karn. And I think Jim may just run away with this game from this point.
Well, it's interesting because you still have choices. Like, what do you actually do with Karn on this turn? You could go after the Thopter Foundry, in which case a token gets created. You probably sacrifice the Sword of the Meek to make the token a 2/3, and then you can start pressuring the Karn. And then, the Karn is fairly low on loyalty. Obviously, it's going to grow pretty quickly.
And it's got Ulamog backing it up. I think that's just safe here.
I mean, it's also possible that you just don't care about the Thopter combo and
You just want a plus?
Yeah, you just tick up.
I could buy that as well. Let's see what Jim does. How about that? Jim, certainly a Tron master, someone who spent a lot of time around this deck. And you see that in some little sequencing decisions that Jim makes. That's where you really reflect your mastery of this archetype. Very small edges to be gained. Certainly you have those absolutely busted draws where you just run away with the game. But there's something to learn with Tron as well. And there's a difference when Jim Davis plays this deck than when someone just picking it up for the first time plays it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you see the willingness to mulligan a lot. I think
huge
point. That is the difference between good and great Tron pilots, I believe.
I'm with you.
So,
there is Ulamog being fetched with Sanctum of Ugin.
So worth noting that sometimes these decks that have Whir of Invention, Thopter Foundry, Sword of the Meek have a way to turn that into a combo kill. Mm-hmm. And before they played one Kork Clan Ironworks, which allowed you to make infinite mana and gain infinite life.
Nice.
KCI is banned.
Mm-hmm.
So you could play Time Sieve to take infinite turns once you have 5 tokens in play.
Yep.
Or Clock Omen? Clock something Omen?
I don't even know the card you're looking for right now. Is it Clock of Omens?
Maybe. It's tap 2 artifacts to untap an artifact.
What set is that from?
I don't know. I saw this in a recent deck list, and I was like, oh, that's actually kind of genius. It's 4-mana artifact where you tap 2 artifacts to untap an artifact. So with Mox Opal and this combo, you can actually make infinite tokens. And usually in matchups like this...
Look at that, Clock
boom,
of Omens.
5th Dawn, All-Star. That was quick. You just get a glimpse of it. That's it.
Don't get too attached to it. There you see Clock of Omens. 4 mana, tap 2 untapped artifacts you control, untap target artifact. One of the weirder cards in the history of Magic, probably.
But yeah, Zan doesn't have any of these cards in his deck.
Correct.
But he otherwise he would be threatening like a potential lethal very soon now that he has assembled Thopter Sword. But this is the kind of matchup where you would want something like that.
Right. Jim's choice was to minus Karn on a land.
I'm in.
So now Zan going to be able to pressure Karn a bit with that 2/3 Thopter. Here's Mox Opal. Here's Tezzeret, Agent of Bolas.
Got to pull that one up.
Yeah, I would love to take a look at that as well. I know its plus allows you to look at, I believe, the top 5 and grab an artifact. Its minus does like a bunch of damage based on the number of artifacts in play, which Zan could very quickly put together via this Thopter Sword combo.
I was killed by this card in the finals of a Pro Tour.
Okay. How did that feel?
Not great.
I believe that.
Not great.
Yeah, of course, Luis Salvado deploying this card against you. There you see Tezzeret, Agent of Bolas. +1, look at top 5 cards of your library. Put an artifact into your hand. -1, target artifact becomes a 5/5 artifact creature.
Permanently.
Permanently. Let's see if we want to deal with that Karn right now via Tezzeret, Agent of Bolas. I think that's an interesting question. Meanwhile, the -4, target player loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the number of artifacts you control.
Twice the number.
Twice, thank you. That's a big game right there. A lot of damage real quick. And I do think we're going to see the minus, and I think we're going to see that Thopter become a 5/5 and just eat that Karn right off the bat.
A lot of options here. I mean, you could make the sword a 5/5, at which point it becomes a creature and falls off of the creature.
Right.
Because equipment that are creatures can't be equipped to things.
Right.
So get in some damage, get rid of that Karn. This is interesting.
Yeah, you have to at least question a little bit Jim's choice on the last turn, going after the land. I think there were some other options available. Jim says it doesn't matter. I'm going to clean this all up. How about Oblivion Stone?
I mean, if you have an O-Stone, it makes sense to not go after anything that's on the battlefield,
absolutely,
right?
100%. This makes sense now. And Jim cleans up all the work that Zan had done and is in a commanding position with 10 mana available and an Ulamog in hand. Pressure squarely on Zan now to get something done. What's the land here?
Zan looking for a miracle on the top of his deck. I don't think he's going to find it.
I don't think so either. It seems like he needs combinations of cards. Individual cards don't do a whole lot for Zan.
Right. I mean, it's possible with...
How about Chalice on 1? That do anything for you?
It would have been good if you got to start the game with that on the battlefield, you know.
Right.
That would have got Jim pretty good, but...
Yep.
Zan needed to draw his one of Damping Sphere, or he needed to have a bunch of things on the battlefield that would have allowed him to like whir for it maybe, which would have stopped the impending Ulamog.
Very good point. But, alas, not the case. Ulamog entering the battlefield, eating up 2 of Zan's land. Zan going to go ahead and take a draw. Has a Mox Opal. But we're going to see Ulamog do its thing here.
Mox Opal not even active. And I think Zan's last card is an Ensnaring Bridge, too, which actually could have done something.
Yeah, could have bought a little bit of time. Jim going to go ahead and fire off Thought Knot Seer, though. And that's going to take a look at that last card. It is, in fact, Ensnaring Bridge. Jim says, thank you very much. I'll take that. And that's going to get the handshake from Zan Syed. Jim Davis takes down the match 2-1, and that takes the match for his team. And they move to 8-0, the very, very experienced, very powerful team